Hey everybody, I want to talk about strokes, my history with them, warning signs to look for, and common misconceptions about them. That said, let's get right into it. One of the reasons I want to talk about strokes is that I've had one, so I can speak from a position of authority about certain aspects of the stroke itself and stroke recovery. Now, to begin with, this was about 11 years ago. I have pretty much recovered as much as I'm going to at this point. I went home one night after working my bar shift at Chili's, and at about 1 o'clock that evening, I went to bed and I woke up 3 days later, not knowing what had happened, what was going on, where I was, anything like that. It was only in retrospect that I learned that I had had a stroke and that I had been laying insensate on my bed for the last three days. Long story short, I was able to get some water eventually, which was really difficult because my entire right side of my body was paralyzed. It took a bit of maneuvering to get into the kitchen from where I was, and then from there I went to the living room, sat down, and waited. I lived alone, and I didn't know when or if anybody would come by to check on me. Although I lived alone, my mom lived 2 houses down from me, so I knew that at some point somebody would be coming by. I just didn't anticipate how long it would be. Again, in retrospect, it was 5 days before someone found me and got me to the hospital. From then, it became a whirlwind of activity of which I had little to no recollection. I remember getting a CAT scan in Lafayette, and then being driven all the way to Baton Rouge to one of the preeminent neurological centers in the United States, especially in the Southeast. In retrospect, this was a good place to have a stroke, but I would still rather not have it. My recovery took a long time. As I alluded to, my entire right side of my body was paralyzed. I had little to no recognition of speech. I could tell that the people there cared about me and were concerned about me, but that was all that I could be aware of. And I didn't know if I would, in fact, recover from this. After about the first month, I began to show signs that my recovery would probably be a good one, although not nearly as full as I would like. And that proved to be the case. I still walk with a limp, and there are some other specific symptoms having to do with my stroke in particular that we'll talk about a little bit later. One of the key things that I can say as a takeaway from this experience has been that your demeanor when you are around a stroke victim has everything to do with how they view their own recovery. And I'm just going to leave it at that. Now that we've gotten my story out of the way, we can blow up that one anecdote to speak about strokes in the United States. I'm going to be speaking from the Internet Stroke Center specifically as far as all of my statistics are concerned. So anybody that wants to go there and look, there will be a link below. There are approximately 800,000 strokes per year in the United States, and of those, around 140,000 end in fatalities. This is actually a 15% decrease in the number of fatalities that we had in the 90s. So we have made strides in preventing fatalities. Strokes or brain attacks come about when part of the brain is starved of oxygen. This can happen one of two ways. One way, a blood clot dislodges from elsewhere in the body and travels through the circulatory system until it reaches the brain, where all of those small capillaries are especially vulnerable to clots. Once the clot is in place, the starving of oxygen begins. The other way, which I suffered, happens as the result of an aneurysm. They are known as ischemic and hemorrhagic strokes, respectively. However, if the person suffering a stroke, especially ischemic strokes, is seen by medical professionals quickly, most or all of the side effects of having a stroke can be avoided. So, what should you be aware of if you want to help someone who you suspect of having a stroke? In short, FAST. It's a short acronym that could save a life. F is for facial drooping. Ask them to smile. If they have a problem with getting one half of their face to conform to the rest of their face, then you know, or at least suspect, that there is a problem. A is for arm weakness. Ask them to raise both arms to shoulder level. They will either have difficulty in raising the arm of the affected side, or they will slowly allow it to drop once they're in position. Either way, you should be concerned. S is for speech. Whether slurred or nonsensical, ask the person a simple question or to repeat a simple phrase. If it comes out as gibberish, or if they just have difficulty making the word shapes in their mouth, then there is a serious problem. And T, time, is the most vital of all. If you can get a stroke victim in to see medical professionals within 4 hours of noticing the symptoms, then you will have done a great service to that individual. Most of the strokes that we see, especially in older people, are caused by blood clots. So if they can get into medical professionals and receive thrombolytic care, then their life could possibly be saved. So this brings me to misconceptions, of which the widest ranging is that strokes only happen to older individuals. It is true that 75% of stroke victims are 65 years of age or older, but that leaves 25% unaccounted for. For instance, my sociology professor was an individual who was born having a stroke. He had his umbilical cord wrapped around his throat, and he was deprived of oxygen for a couple of minutes, and he has suffered a number of side effects, including a shambling gait. So that happened when he was just a baby. As well, there's a story that I remember reading in the New York Times about a 7-year-old baseball player who had slid into second base, and that dislodged a clot in his leg, which went up to his brain and caused a stroke. Because no one thought to look for a stroke in a 7-year-old, they weren't able to catch it in time, and that boy has serious side effects. Another somewhat related misconception is that a stroke necessarily leaves you basically a vegetable. That's patently, obviously untrue, me being a prime example. Different parts of the brain can be affected. There is no one set of circumstances that allows you to determine whether or not someone has had a stroke. In particular, a portion of, in my case rather, a portion of the left hemisphere's circle of Willis was affected, leaving me with very particular symptoms, such as a tendency to keep my right hand behind my back. And I've had to deal with this for the last 11 years. It has brought about, changes in my musculature. There isn't much that I can do about that. But in no way, shape, or form am I a vegetable, thankfully. However, I do have some side effects, especially in areas of speech and thought. Sometimes the thoughts don't come nearly as quickly. The speech doesn't come out nearly as quickly. And it can be difficult for me or for those listening to me. So thank you. So to summarize, remember the FAST acronym, of which time is the most essential ingredient in a stroke victim's recovery. As well, don't kid yourself into thinking that just because someone is young, they can't be suffering a life-threatening condition such as a stroke. Another of the reasons I wanted to do this is that it doesn't get nearly the exposure as something like heart disease, but is equally important. During the Circle of Willis discussion, I watched a video about brain anatomy and what the Circle of Willis does in particular and what effect it has on the stroke. So I would also recommend that video, and it's down below. Anyway, that's my public service announcement. If you'd be interested in seeing more of my content and always be notified of anything new I put out, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. If you like this video, please hit like. If not, you know what to do. And please, leave a comment below. If you'd like to help me continue improving my channel, please consider visiting my Patreon page and becoming a patron for as little as $1 monthly, or to my PayPal account for a one-time donation. You can find me on Twitter or Facebook under the name PanicClown. As usual, my Discord and Instagram pages are up, but still underutilized. Catch you on the flip side.